Conversations from the front lines of recruiting. This is Hireside Chats. Join us as we delve into the world of recruitment and explore the latest trends, challenges, opportunities, and insights from the best in the business. Get inspired by industry veterans and discover the secrets to building powerful talent functions from their experiences. Whether you're a CEO, a seasoned HR professional, a growing business looking to scale, or someone just starting in the field, there's something for everyone. Ready for the ultimate recruitment power-up? Let's go!
Hello, this is your host SatJ and welcome to another episode of Hireside Chats, a Diamondpick exclusive podcast that brings together insights, news and views from the front lines of recruiting. Join us as we delve into a hot topic currently making waves in today's workforce. We are faced with a rapidly changing world of work, dealing with the effects of the pandemic, while being expected to keep up with new tech, learn new skills to stay relevant, adapt to changing cultural norms, and so much more. It's a lot to handle, making brain drain, poor mental health, and burnout the number one issue most professionals face. Unlocking brain capital is a unique and exciting way to rethink the way we approach work by focusing on optimizing brain health by tapping into an employee's full cognitive potential. Brain capital is fast becoming a new organizational asset, optimizing brain health and skills to generate greater worker productivity, hire better, and build a stronger, more resilient workforce. Here to talk to us about this cross-disciplinary and cross-functional approach and the impact of AI and science on the recruitment landscape is Naresh Nagarajan, Chief Technology Officer, Neurowyzr. Naresh is an industry-recognized IT leader who has created and led successful product startups with expertise in analytics and deep learning. He leads the technology team at Neurowyzr, a brain capital company that uses the latest thinking in neuroscience, advanced analytics, and AI to optimize employee brain health and performance. Also joining us is Nav Vij, Chief Digital Neuroscientist and a part of the co-founding team of Neurowyzr. Nav is a creative leader driving innovative change by helping people unleash the power of their brains. He's an expert at technology-led neuroscience focused on enhancing recruitment practices. Tune into the episode as we discuss the impact of putting a premium on brain health to help employees thrive in today's complex world, and how neuroscience and AI can transform recruitment as we know it. Hello, Naresh and Nav, and welcome to Hireside Chats.
Hello, Satish. How are you today?
Hi, Satish. Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much. Naresh and Nav, the first question is directed to the two of you. Our brains work 24/7, and it doesn't stop even when we sleep, always thinking, resolving, and making decisions. This cutting-edge concept of optimizing our brains using deep learning-based digital tools is trending across industries. So why don't you tell us something about this? What exactly is this concept of brain capital and how does it drive innovation in today's economy? And also, it'll help if you can tell us a little bit about what you guys do and what led to the creation of Neurowyzr.
Sure, Satish. Thanks for that question. I'm always excited to talk about brain capital. I think, like you very rightly mentioned, it's a very exciting, cutting edge, a new thought process, especially in the combination of technology, AI, as well as neurosciences. Brain capital generally means the combination of everything we think about how we feel better, think better. So it combines our mental status, which means our mental health, as well as the productivity in our brain, the cognitive capability of our mind, even the health of our brain as well. It also extends into the economics of brain health and productivity. When I say economics, I think businesses in running efficiently, retaining employees, keeping talented people talented. And so that all encapsulates under this big umbrella label of brain capital.
Great. Naresh, so if you can tell us what led to the creation of Neurowyzr, where did this idea originate and how far have you guys come along?
If you look at the founding team of Neurowyzr, there are a lot of ventures in this mental health, mental well-being, brain space. If you look at the landscape around, a lot of them are technology first and then the domain is applied. And unlike these ventures, the genesis of Neurowyzr started with a couple of the most famous neuroscientists and surgeons in Asia today. So one is a core founder who is Dr. Prem Pillai, who has had eclectic qualifications from the US. And he was invited by the Singapore government to come and set up the National Neurological Institute in Singapore way back. He came here and he did put in a lot of research and technology application and spinning off a whole set of new areas that applied neuroscience to both the medical and emerging corporate ideas. That was one. Second was, of course, Nav, who is also an emerging neuroscientist who had done his studies in Australia. These two gentlemen, coupled with a host of other research from 3 or 4 countries, sat down together to understand two things. One, how is today the whole concept of the science behind the brain works in terms of if you really zoom out and look at the way the health is measured. So COVID, if you look at it, in a matter of about 3 years, governments and science got together and democratized the entire data. Unlike any other physiological organ, brain is the command center. Still, science understands only 9 to 10% of the entire concept and the physiological aspects of that wonderful part of the human body. The rest of the human body, so much has been researched. Like if you look at the heart, everything has been researched, but the brain research is still emerging. And it's a very, very complex space. Now, on the second dimension, if you look at health itself, if you imagine the health as a continuum from wellness to, let's say, clinical wellness being your normal self-care, how do you address it? Suppose you have a fever, you can go into a clinical setting or get hospitalized. If you just look at that kind of a spectrum, every part of the human body, like for example, if you do an exercise or if you have a fever, you start by first measuring where are you in terms of the health. Once you measure, then things can be improved. And that aspect is applied to any other part of the physiological health. Now, if you take the brain, unfortunately, we as human beings do not exercise the brain so much. In fact, not exercises at all. The minute you say brain, everybody thinks MRI, something is wrong with him. You even get into aspects of, is he mentally unwell and things like that. No, actually, brain is also another physiological organ. Just like you measure a fever or a stomachache, whatever it is, right? You have to start by measuring it. So the team put all their research together, and some substance of it was to make it simple, we'll come up with a science-backed way of measurement. And in doing so, unlike the current methods where, it involves the measurement techniques, which is pen and paper, driven through 3 or 4 days of extensive meeting with the patient, which is very expensive. The advent of the cloud, the digital tools lent itself very well. So they married the two, the science behind measurement and the digital tools, to come up with this wonderful way of measuring current brain performance of a human being. And that's the genesis of our first test, which is called Digital Brain Function Screen. This is meant as a screening. Now, from there, we've evolved a lot. A couple of years, we have created a variant of it for the corporate setting that Nav talked about a little bit earlier. And now we're also advancing into the other parts of the food chain in terms of brain science. It is also not understood by many people that brain, just like any other organ, right? The performance starts diminishing from an optimal age. And science and research have shown that till around the age of 28, 30 is when the peak performance is achieved. But after that, it slowly starts deteriorating. Of course, for normal 80 to 85% of the people, you don't feel the decline. But over 50 or 55, depending on what we call the neuroplasticity of the brain, the gap between the neurons increase. And in some cases, if the gaps is too much, then you hear cases of dementia and more complicated diseases. We believe that the application of digital technology by applying neuroscience, which is, in our situation, FDA-backed and HSA-backed kind of test, with the imposition of AI and analytics, can eventually lead to more predictive analytics and foresight for brain diseases, because that's the way in terms of future that we can control a lot of other diseases which affects the human body, like we've been seeing in the last 2-3 years. So now, if you want to add anything to it.
Well, I think that was a perfect description, Naresh. That makes a lot of sense. I think the key takeaway from what Naresh said was the concept of measurement actually being at the forefront of all change, all intervention, all improvement. Any performance growth always starts with a objective measurement and continuous and follow-up longitudinal checks to make sure that we're on the right track at improving. And hence, the genesis of Neurowyzr was to create these tools that can be easily adopted and based fully on deep neuroscience fundamentals.
Thanks, Naresh and Nav. And Nav, staying with you, how do we harness neuroscience to build a high-performing, productive, and creative agile workforce, especially after we've just come out of a pandemic. People are experiencing burnout. There's so much of stress in the system that we see today. Neurowyzr has been doing some exceptional work. And what will also help, Nav, is if you can share some examples of how organizations have been able to leverage brain capital to bring out their best in employees, and how has Neurowyzr been helping them?
Sure. I like your question. I especially like that you mentioned high performing, productive, and creative. When we do our research in brain capital, we do our research in productive employees, and we always look forward. We look at the next 10, I would say even 10, 15, 20 years maybe. And we look at what would be considered successful in the next 20 years. We are now entering a knowledge workforce, which means that the most important tool, that the most important asset, I would say, that every company has, and we ask this of every employer, the most important asset they would have, I will answer the question for them, I'll tell you, it's their employees. And the most important asset that each and every employee has, in fact, is the health and functionality of their brain. As we move into the next decade, these are the adjectives that become truly important: high performing, productive, especially creativity and agility. Agile actually, from a neuroscience point of view, means learning adaptability and learning agility, which means the ability to pick up new tools. During COVID, a lot of older workforce members struggle with suddenly having to switch to Zoom, and then one day it's Teams and it's Google Meets and it's all these different types of software. All these little skills, no matter how small or how big the change in your function is, it involves a form of learning adaptability. So is your brain plastic enough? Is your brain sponge-like enough, healthy enough? At the same time, is your mental status resilient enough? Are you free from anxiety that you are able to pick up these tools in a quick, easy way that allows you to make some errors, but then ultimately become a master of some of these tools? So that helps growth in companies, true growth in each individual. So we use neuroscience by building these tools of measurement, then creating granular systems of support so that we can help employees on a granular level, while employers create resources and systems that can hedge our resources and support people from a business point of view. So allow for resources and tools, and on a granular level, allow employees to understand when and where to access these tools. Satish, we work with some companies, and I'll give you some examples. We work with large finance-based companies, huge knowledge worker industries, definitely suffering through burnout, suffering through stress, like you mentioned. In fact, the stress is a bit different because COVID is a situation we call unprecedented. So this is a stress an individual meets where they have not met before. They don't know how to encounter it. They don't know how to overcome it. So what happens a lot of times is we turn to tools that what we call a one-stop shop type solutions, where we will answer 3 or 4 questions. You may be asked things like, how angry did you feel the last week, 1 to 10? We must allow for the subjective score from an employee. A lot of times in burnout, in stress, we don't even know how stressed we are. We don't know how it affects the rest of our lives. We don't know how it affects our work. From the neuroscience point of view, we support these businesses, especially the finance industry that we did here in Singapore, by building objective tools. These tools don't need employees to answer and look within and try to come up with a 1 to 10 rating. They use our tools and we give an objective view so they are better understood where they stand, how well the status of their mental health is, their emotional status is, and also more importantly, how well their cognitive capabilities are performing. Having said so, maybe I can give you one analogy of a very interesting back and forth we had with a HR team. And it was a wonderful question asked by the head of HR. This is a very prominent company. And we noticed that mindfulness, which is a very powerful feature of both your cognition as well as your mental state, mindfulness was low. The company scored low, the particular team scored low, and the HR was very quick to share, very rightfully so, that they had amazing sessions set up once a month for employees to access mindfulness. In fact, they had very wonderful mindfulness and meditation teachers that would come and people could volunteer and join these courses. And she says, Nav, if I'm having all these wonderful monthly classes for mindfulness, then how come, number one, mindfulness is low? And secondly, what else can we do if we're already doing these classes? Now, this goes back to what Naresh said, I think, around the idea of measurement, because from our research, what has been happening, I can tell you, is that the people that are mindful are the only ones going for the mindfulness classes. In essence, people that are not mindful are not going for these classes. It's a very basic form of human instinct. We do things that we feel we're good at or that we can achieve in. So how we support them is by creating these digital tools or allowing for objective measurements and then supporting and nudging individuals to the direction that would help them the most. In essence, give you the highest form of ROI as an individual on a trajectory of positive growth as in your brain as well as in your mental state.
Thanks, Nav. So Naresh, you've been a successful entrepreneur. You've successfully managed and run product companies, startups. And I'm sure you agree with me that comprehending the human brain and understanding the full range of an employee's behavioral, psychological, and social attributes throughout an employee's life cycle can help make new achievements possible in the whole process of recruiting and hiring. And you have had the experience of hiring several people in your career. So can you elaborate on how neuroscience can help organizations attract potential employees, and does Neurowyzr have plans in enhancing the tools and technology that is available today to use neuroscience to help with this whole recruitment process?
So thanks, Satish. This is an extremely relevant question to today's times. If you see the transition of how employment and the business itself over the last 3 decades, enough has been said about digital, right? But today, if you really look, even the large companies are trying to behave, function, or organize themselves as startups simply because the environment outside is changing so fast, whether it's geopolitical, market, business drivers, it changes by the quarter. That's the number one attribute. The second attribute is in terms of time, whether you're a public company or not, whether you're funded by a VC or promoted by individuals, does not matter. Everybody is now looking at how in the least amount of time we can start generating profit. Because at times when the capital to fund is plenty, no questions are asked. But one wrong moment, like for example, we have heard enough about the funding winter today in our balance sheet in terms of how profitable. If not profitable, then start looking at cutting people, the other costs, so that you start generating meaningful returns for investors. That's the second attribute. The third attribute is the human centricity itself. Now, while 30, 40 years ago, most of the skills requirements were very linear in terms of the ability to understand what was told you, and in some kind of a very sequential fashion, the tasks were done. Today, it's very global, whether it's a manufacturing or even services. Every part of whatever is conceptualized from order to cash in terms of a process is done in multiple parts of the world. And in most often very rapidly changing environment where the customer himself or herself is not very sure about the requirements and is looking at the solution provider to address these. That's the third dimension in terms of the skills itself. The fourth dimension, which is added to it, like what Nav was attributing, is very recently huge disruptions like COVID. If you combine all these four and really look at and apply it to this digital age, the need to be very resilient, highly adaptive. What is relevant today is not relevant tomorrow in terms of skill sets. Then ability to program manage multiple things at the same time, yet deliver to the timelines required of various stakeholders. That's becoming very important. And change is only moving constant. In all this, how do you ensure that you stay very productive and be very mindful in terms of not just yourself, but your team, and carry the team along? These are very, very definite requirements. Now, about a decade back, maybe neuroscience was not so important. As long as you had the technical skill sets or the engineering skill sets or the physical skill sets, that would kind of suffice in meeting the requirements of the job at that time. But today, those things are secondary compared to the ability of the brain to understand what it is and flow with the change. The performance of the brain and managing the complexities of the mind becomes very, very crucial. Neuroscience has been gaining a lot of traction in the last couple of years. And I believe going into the future in the next 5-10 years, with the advent of AI, where there's a whole lot of things, right from fear psychosis to actual implementation like automation, jobs being taken away, is going to become a reality. It's very, very important that the employees of tomorrow really have the brain health and neuroscience as the center. That said, what are the various techniques and technologies being applied? The whole concept of neuroscience is not about asking, like Nav said, a set of questions And we look at like a net promoter score of yes or no, and then coming up with an aggregated score, no. It's all about the experience. So if you want to make sure that the performance of the brain of a person is improved, it has to be done over time. I mean, there's no magic bullet in saying that it can be done in 1 month or 2 months. It's a sustained effort. In order to do that, there are various techniques. First, you start with the measurement. And even the way of administering the measurement is very important. The experience of that measurement for a person should be very unique. If you take in our case, we have completely gamified the whole thing. It's like playing a set of puzzles. Once that is measured, there's a whole set of support procedures available from a normal counseling or even in terms of coaching, etc. That's one side. Even some of the technologies that are emerging is therapies in terms of improving the brain performance are in the form of games. There are these small games that are being developed that can be played on the mobile. Suppose you are having a stressful situation or you want to improve mindfulness or particular aspect of the brain. There are specific games which are being designed by neuroscientists to be deployed for the end consumer. That's the second area of technology that is being developed. The third area is very specialized, highly articulate brain coaching. There is this concept of brain coaches that is coming up, which is high and over above normal counselors and therapists. These are highly trained neuroscientists armed with the right set of tools, and they've digitized the course content, and it's a very highly tailored program for a specific set of corporate executives. It can be across any level. That is the third. The fourth is, of course, the whole concept of AI and more recently, generative AI. Let's say this set of technologies has been deployed across 100,000 people. Over a period of time, we build models and we can train these models and thereby apply a set of rules and AI or generative techniques to come out with a new set of recommendations or insights that can help the individual. Of course, there are some challenges in applying these technologies straight because most of these are evolving. Because the minute you bring the concept of AI, there is a concept of bias also included in it. Currently, there are a lot of studies being done to see how some of those can be mitigated over the next 3 to 5 years. But the technology offers a lot of potential in terms of how do you simplify this so that the next set of recommendations actually learns from hundreds of people, patients, and consumers having gone through these stressful situations and learning from it and tracking the model with it. That's the fifth area that is developing. But where all this, I think the fundamental aspect is neuroscience. These are some of the techniques and technologies that are in play. But most recently, generative AI, and I think that will develop more and more.
Thanks, Naresh. I know there's been so much of buzz in the recent months about generative AI and the interactions between generative AI and neuroscience, and you brought out some of the advances that AI has had and its potential to transform the whole talent landscape as we know it. But there is, like you rightly said, a lot of fear, psychosis being spread around in terms of people losing jobs, AI creating a lot of unemployment in the world and so on. So question to Nav, very often when we talk about these topics in organizations, the first reaction is fear. And now with generative AI and so much of neuroscience being spoken around, and especially when you speak about brain health and all that with employees, how do you think the reception has been, and has Neurowyzr been successful in convincing organizations that this is the way to go?
Thanks, Satish. The way that we look at this question is rather the positioning or understanding of neuroscience, especially things like brain health. Yes, there is a stigma when you talk to employees about brain health. But when we switch the conversation, we talk about brain performance, or we talk about turbocharging the use of your brain, people start to get very excited. There are very few people that we meet whom do not admit that they would like to sharpen the way they think, manage stress better. The problem when it comes to brain health is because of what's happened during COVID. During COVID, the spotlight is shown on mental health. This actually served to amplify the stigma a little bit. Most people get worried. The human instinct is to get worried when it comes to close to what we call a disease state or a disorder state. And that's what's happened with mental health. But neuroscience sits on a very different level. It has a lot of opportunity to live in the preventative space, in the space of brain turbocharging, or like I said, brain performance growth. So in speaking with companies and businesses, we found some interesting success when we come in and work with people whom we say are very healthy, whom they are feeling fine. The mantra is that they want to feel fine for a very long time. And hence, we find the adoption of these tools to be quite high. The moment the conversation is switched into anything to do with your mental state or your mental health or how you're doing, people start to get a bit wary, they get a bit stressed out. In fact, that is what we call a white coat effect. Just the idea of a mental health test makes you feel like you're anxious, makes you feel like you're upset. So from a neuroscience angle, we use a lot of clinical back tools, clinical back concepts. So neuroscience is one of those interesting subjects that sits all the way from preventative health in healthy people all the way into people with disease state. It's just that Neurowyzr focuses with businesses on keeping healthier people healthy, keeping talented people even more talented. And this has helped to attract and simplify or even empower the recruitment process. In fact, one of the things that we try to look for, if we speak to HR teams, and if you look at recruitment over the last few years, diversity and inclusion is a very powerful topic. And this drives a lot of the hiring and recruitment landscapes. From a neuroscience point of view, we look at it from a point of view, we call it neurodiversity. So as we move forward with generative AI, with AI in recruitment, even in building better and stronger teams, neurodiversity is a very powerful point, a very powerful topic. For example, if you have a team of 9 people and you're looking to hire and fill in a 10th person, they may all have sound technical skills. Like Naresh said, they may be good in engineering concepts. If it's an accountancy team, they may be wonderful in mathematics and principle of accounts, and they're able to manipulate numbers in a very good way. But when you come to the soft skills, imagine if there are 9 people in a team and all 9 are risk takers. You may want to hire a 10th person who is not a risk taker. That is neurodiversity. So having team members in smaller teams have differential types of thought processes, all driven from a preventative mindset. So we found that has destigmatized the entire event in the workplace.
Awesome, Nav. Very, very interesting thoughts. Now, before we conclude, we usually have a customary rapid fire, but given the time constraint, I would like to ask each one of you one question, and it'll help if you can give us a quick and a candid response. Let's continue our conversation with Nav. If there is one brain boosting best practice in your day-to-day regime, what would that be, and what would your suggestion be to our listeners?
Sure, Satish, I talk about this all the time. I'm passionate about brain boosting practices. If I get permits, I'll add another 5 seconds. I'll share one that I do every week, at least once a week for 1 hour, and I'll share a shorter one, which will take your listeners only a couple of seconds to do. The more important one, I think, in keeping your brain sharp, in fighting away mental stress is, and most people don't do this, is spending at least 1 hour a week, quiet time, with no distractions, and spend that time thinking. For me, this is every Friday afternoon, either 1 to 2 or 2 to 3 p.m. And when I say thinking, I mean, think about an independent project. It should be nothing to do with work. Think about a topic in the world. Think about a problem that you think from what you have read from current news that would be wonderful to solve. You don't need to research anything. You don't need ChatGPT. Sit in a quiet space and use your brain and think. What you're doing is you're creating new neuronal linkages. You're allowing yourself to think what we call laterally and horizontally. You're thinking creatively. This allows you to improve the way you innovate. It's a very powerful feature. And I can tell you within 3 weeks of doing this, you're going to see a massive shift in how you look at problems when they come to your plate. Both problems professionally and personally. You'll elevate your mental status, elevate your emotional mood. So something that most people don't do, and I encourage everyone to do, is spend 1 hour a week just simply thinking. That's one. The second, one of the major fundamental cognitive processes for a successful employee, for a successful person in life, is actually attention. This has waned across the world globally over the past 10 years. Attention is a very powerful feature. A lot of people don't have it. And this trick is a clinical trick. If you spend hours in front of the computer like I do, if you're on Zoom calls, many Zoom calls a day, towards the end of the day, look out any window that you can and look at the furthest object that is organically green. If you cannot find organically green, you can find anything that's painted green, that's fine. Organic green is powerful. Look at a tree, anything that is organically green from nature. And the furthest thing you can find, it relaxes your iris muscles. Spend 30 seconds to 1 minute doing that. It improves your level of attention and it relaxes your brain. It will decelerate any of the stress you may be feeling. So this is my 2 tips that I actually do fairly regularly.
Thank you, Nav, and I'm certainly going to try this out this Friday. Thanks for that. Now, Naresh, one cognitive skill that you feel is a must-have for all our modern workplaces?
I think one cognitive skill is resilience, which is very, very important, because today it's just the times are changing. And I think even in a very big corporation, things are like a startup. You're not very sure whether tomorrow you're going to have the job or no, or even how the customer is changing. So how resilient you are and how you can develop resilience is key. And the more resilient you are, both in personal life as well as in corporate life, it's going to help an individual.
Totally agree with you, Naresh. So thank you. That brings us to the end of today's episode. I want to express my sincere gratitude to Naresh and Nav for sharing their expertise on this fascinating approach to brain health and brain performance, and of course, the impact of technology in the future of work. To everyone who tuned in, thank you for listening to Hireside Chats. Join us next time for another episode as we bring you the latest and the best from the recruitment world. Find us wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Don't miss a single episode. Subscribe to Hireside's Chats today. Don't forget to leave a review or share on your socials to help us reach as many ears as possible. So until next time, stay tuned, and thank you once again, Naresh and Nav.
Thank you.